Saturday afternoon, 1978. You walk through the back door of your nan's house in Blacktown, kick off your thongs on the lino, and the first thing you see is a plastic doll sitting on the back of the toilet with a massive crocheted dress hiding a spare roll of sorbent underneath. Nobody told you why it was there. Nobody needed to, because every house on the street had one too. That's just one of 20 items from Australian homes in the 70s and 80s that made absolutely no sense, but were in every single house you ever walked into. You've probably forgotten half of them, but the moment I mention them, the smell of that carpet and the sound of that screen door will come flooding straight back. Let's start where every Australian story eventually ends up, which is the backyard. Lance Hill came home from the war in 1945 to his house in Adelaide and found his wife's clothesline tangled in a lemon tree. Most blokes would have untangled it and gone inside for a beer, but Hill dragged some pipe into his shed and welded together a rotary clothesline that could be raised, lowered and spun. His brother-in-law, Harold Ling, came on board. They started Hills Industries in 1946, and that very first batch of hoists was built from tubing salvaged from a giant underwater boom net that had stretched beneath the Sydney Harbour Bridge during the war to catch enemy submarines. So Australia's most beloved laundry accessory was literally born from anti-submarine warfare, and nobody has ever been able to top that origin story. 5 million units were shipping per year at peak production. The National Library of Australia listed the Hills Hoist as a national treasure in 2006. It appeared on a postage stamp in 2009, and the Royal Australian Mint put it on a $1 coin in 2019 as part of the Great Aussie Coin Hunt. During Cyclone Tracy in 1974, one Darwin family's Hills Hoist was the only thing left standing in their yard while the actual house was flattened around it. And none of that is why Australians loved it. Australians loved it because it was a playground. Every kid in the country hung off those arms while someone walked them around in circles. Birthday parties had donuts pegged to the lines. Tarps got draped over it for backyard marquees. Fairy lights went up at Christmas. And then there was Goon of Fortune, the drinking game where you pegged bags of cheap cask wine to the lines, gave it a spin, and whoever the bag stopped in front of had to drink. At the 2000 Sydney Olympics closing ceremony, oversized Hills Hoist props were wheeled out alongside giant thongs and Speedo-clad lifesavers as official national symbols. Australia told the entire world that its proudest cultural achievement was a clothesline, and 4 billion viewers watched it happen without a single Australian feeling embarrassed. Now let's go inside and deal with the bathroom, because the bathroom is where Australian homes of this era lost the plot completely. The knitted dolly toilet roll cover is one of those objects that academics have genuinely tried and failed to explain. The American Scholar, a serious literary journal, published an article about them that opened by admitting they arose in the 1960s and 1970s across the United States, England, and Australia, and remain a phenomenon little studied by academia. A half doll, usually resembling a crinoline lady or something vaguely Barbie adjacent, sat on the back of the toilet wearing an enormous crocheted skirt. And underneath that skirt was a spare roll of toilet paper. The best theory anyone has come up with is that for families who grew up without reliable access to toilet paper, owning a spare roll was a small luxury worth displaying. But the execution was completely unhinged. Guests had to lift a doll's skirt to access toilet paper. The doll watched you the entire time. Every nana in Australia made at least one, and they were a staple of church fairs and charity bazaars across the country. A 1992 Australian children's book called The Weird Things in Nana's House specifically listed a doll you can't play with that covers the extra roll of toilet paper in the bathroom, alongside fragile china dogs and plastic fruit. Confirming this was a nationally recognised archetype. Pattern books were published. Crochet circles treated them as a rite of passage. And to this day, nobody knows who made the first one, where the idea came from, or why an entire generation of women decided that toilet paper needed to be concealed beneath the skirt of a small woman. While we're in the bathroom, we need to talk about the Avocado suite. That specific shade of green on the sink, the toilet, and the bathtub, all matching. All in a colour that most Australians had never actually seen on a real avocado. The trend started when General Electric introduced avocado green appliances in America in 1966, and by the late 60s, it had crossed the Pacific and colonised Australian bathrooms with a thoroughness that bordered on military. Kohler offered the full Avocado bathroom suite from 1967 to 1979, but in Australian homes these fixtures lasted well into the 90s because the universal justification was that they still worked. You'd pair the green suite with brown carpet on the floor, gold-coloured towels and a matching bath mat, and you genuinely believed you'd created something beautiful. Estate agents spent the following decade begging people to rip them out before viewings. The great Australian appliance brands of the era, Simpson out of Adelaide, Westinghouse, Kelvinator and Chef, all offered the full Avocado, Harvest Gold and Coppertone brown palette across fridges, stoves and ovens. Together, Westinghouse and Chef held nearly 40% of Australia's cooking product sales. These appliances were also built to survive nuclear war, which meant the Avocado fridge in your nan's kitchen outlasted 3 prime ministers and 2 family dogs before anyone could justify replacing it. Every before photo of an Australian kitchen renovation features that fridge, standing there like a green monolith, refusing to die. Speaking of kitchens, the jaffle maker deserves its own monument. The jaffle iron was invented in 1949 by Dr. Ernest Smithers, a Bondi doctor who also invented the surfer plane. But it was the Breville Snack and Sandwich Toaster Model SG1, released in 1974, that turned the toasted sandwich into an Australian institution. The improved 1976 model introduced the iconic diagonal cut that sealed each sandwich into 2 scalding triangles, and it sold 400,000 units in its first year alone, reaching 10% of Australian households almost immediately. By 2014, more than 6 million people worldwide owned one. Fillings ranged from the sensible cheese and tomato to the clinically ambitious leftover bolognese, baked beans, and the famous hack of cracking a raw egg onto bread and sealing it shut to cook inside. The molten cheese burn was a universal rite of passage. That sealed triangle held superheated contents at temperatures that could strip wallpaper, and every single person bit in too early at least once. The burned cheese that leaked through the seal and caramelized on the hot plate was paradoxically the best part. The Powerhouse Museum in Sydney holds a Breville SG2 in its permanent collection whose owner used it every single week for 30 years. And in Australia, unlike Britain, where a 2005 survey found 45% of adults still had one gathering dust, the Breville was never abandoned. It stayed on the bench, it stayed in rotation, and the word Breville entered the Macquarie Dictionary as a noun meaning a diagonally cut toasted sandwich. Now let's go back to the floors, because this is where Australian homes of the 70s really committed to a vision. Shag pile carpet in burnt orange, dark brown, olive green, mustard yellow, and occasionally a shade of lime green that could only have been chosen by someone who had never looked at a floor and asked whether it should hurt to make eye contact with it. One Australian recalled having dark brown in the living room, yellow in their sister's bedroom, a sickly green in theirs, and dark red in their parents' room, which meant every doorway in the house was a colour transition that nobody had planned. Walking across it barefoot was soft and warm, and that was where the good news ended. Anything dropped into shag pile entered another dimension. Coins, pen lids, Lego bricks, earrings, all gone. Owners were sold a special shag rake to groom the carpet and keep the pile standing upright, which meant you were expected to comb your floor like a show poodle. Standard vacuums choked on the deep pile, and every kid who grew up in the era remembers the static electricity, that shuffle across the carpet in socks followed by a shock off the doorknob powerful enough to make you question your life choices. Some families didn't stop at the floor and extended shag pile up the walls and in the most committed households into the bathroom, which combined the carpet's talent for trapping moisture with the bathroom's talent for producing it, and created a smell that no amount of air freshener could defeat. The outdoor dunny is the item on this list with the most genuinely wild backstory. In 1965, 45% of Australian homes were still not connected to any sewerage system. That's not the 1800s. That's the year the Beatles played Festival Hall in Melbourne. The outdoor dunny was standard issue across suburban and regional Australia. A wooden outhouse with a galvanised tin can underneath, a wooden seat with a hole cut in it, a nail on the wall holding squares of torn-up newspaper, and a hinged back door for the dunny man. The dunny man came weekly with a big red truck, swapped out the full can for a washed-out replacement doused in phenol, and disappeared down the lane. Melbourne's nightmen were still operating in some outer suburbs as late as the 1980s. The redback spider situation was not a joke. The dark, sheltered space beneath the dunny seat was prime redback real estate, and roughly 2,000 redback bites per year were recorded across Australia. This fear was immortalised by Slim Newton's 1972 country hit Redback on the Toilet Seat, which peaked at number 3 on the national charts, sold over 100,000 copies and won a golden guitar at the inaugural Country Music Awards. The Whitlam government launched the National Sewerage Program in 1972 when 17.2% of Australians still lacked sewerage, allocating over $330 million to fix the problem. Choco vines were legendarily grown over dunnies to provide shade. The transition from outdoor dunny to indoor toilet was, for an entire generation, the single greatest upgrade of their lives. The Fondue set arrived in Australian homes as a wedding present in the early 70s, fresh from its debut at the 1964 New York World's Fair, and it had roughly the same trajectory in every single household. A ceramic pot, a little spirit burner, a set of color-coded long forks, and the idea that you'd all sit around dipping bread into melted cheese like you were in the Swiss Alps, instead of a fibro house in Penrith. The burner was a nightmare to light. The cheese either stayed hard or turned to rubber. Someone's bread always fell off the fork and sank, and nobody ever knew what you were supposed to do when that happened. Oil fondue, where you cooked raw meat cubes in a pot of boiling oil heated by an open flame while tipsy dinner party guests jabbed at each other with pointy forks, was the variant that genuinely endangered lives. Most fondue sets came out once, created a mess, and went straight back in the box forever. Every op shop in the country still has a stack of them sitting there patiently, waiting for someone to make the same mistake all over again. The SodaStream sat on kitchen benches across Australia from the mid-70s onwards, and for every child of the era it was the most magical object in the house. A machine that made your own fizzy drinks at home. The famous slogan, "Get busy with the fizzy," launched in 1979. And by 1983, SodaStream held 90% of the UK market, with comparable penetration in Australia. The problem was the flavours. The cola tasted nothing like Coca-Cola. It tasted like someone had described Coca-Cola to a chemist who had never actually drunk any, and the chemist had done their best with what they had. Novelty flavours included Dracula's Blood, which was a vivid red cherry, Gremlin Stripe, which was a fruity green, and Mr. T's Knockout Punch, which was bubblegum berry and exactly as alarming as it sounds. Overpressing the button caused spectacular overflow, and what survivors describe as hugely entertaining and incredibly loud farting noises from the machine. Using non-standard bottles risked actual explosion. The classic SodaStream life cycle was universal, enthusiastic use for approximately 6 sessions, followed by permanent exile to the back of the cupboard alongside the fondue set. PepsiCo eventually bought SodaStream in 2018 for $3.2 billion US, which is a staggering amount of money for a machine most Australian families used half a dozen times. The home bar in the rumpus room might be the single most gloriously excessive feature of the Australian suburban home, and it exists because of one specific piece of legislation. Until the late 70s, most Australian pubs closed at 6 p.m. under what was known as the 6 o'clock swill, which meant that if you wanted to drink after 6, you did it at home. Australian dads responded to this by building an entire pub in their house. The typical setup featured faux wood-panelled walls, brightly coloured vinyl bar stools, a beer tap connected to a keg fridge, shelves lined with spirits and beer cans, bar towels from every brewery in the state, a dartboard, and sometimes a pool table. Comedian Tim Ross, who wrote The Rumpus Room and Other Stories from the Suburbs, described the rumpus room as a room designed for kids to hang out in, while their parents wore clothes made of synthetic fibres and experimented with drink driving. Chocolate shag pile carpet, green velvet curtains, and a colour TV completed the picture. Some dads essentially replicated an entire pub, complete with signage, stubby holders on hooks, and occasionally a urinal. When licensing laws relaxed, the trend declined, but the nostalgia never faded. A Sydney venue called Bob Hawke's Beer and Leisure Centre opened in 2022, recreating the 1980s rumpus room aesthetic, and staff report that visitors over 45 get hit in the heart the moment they walk through the doors. Now here's one that visitors from overseas could never get their heads around. The beer can collection. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Australian men and boys collected beer cans and displayed them on shelves along the tops of bedroom or rumpus room walls. The technique was precise. Cans were opened from the bottom to keep the display side top intact, then lined up in rows that could number in the hundreds or thousands. Australia's state-based beer monopolies fueled the obsession. Carlton Draft in Victoria, Two Hays in New South Wales, XXXX in Queensland, Swan in Western Australia, and the lithographed steel cans of the era were genuinely beautiful objects. The Australian Beer Can Collectors Association holds an annual event called Canathon that rotates to a different town each year, drawing collectors from around the world, some of whom own more than 8,000 cans. One couple, profiled by Vice, spent $70,000 building a dedicated garage for their collection instead of going on a world cruise. Another collector admitted that he'd shifted his collection from the bar area into his daughter's bedroom after she moved out and got married, adding that there was no way she could get back in the house. Perhaps the most beautifully absurd detail is that many avid beer can collectors don't even drink beer. They just love the cans. Beck's powders deserve a place on this list because the phrase they created, a cup of tea, a Beck's and a good lie down, is still used in Australian conversation today, which is extraordinary given that the product was effectively banned in 1977 for destroying kidneys. Beck's powders were compound analgesics containing aspirin, phenacetin and caffeine, produced from the 1920s in South Australia, and they were marketed primarily to women. Factory managers provided them free of charge to keep women productive on the line. Regular use exceeded 10% of the population in some states, and many women were taking 30 to 40 doses per day, sometimes washed down with Coca-Cola, while simultaneously being prescribed Valium. Dr. Priscilla Kincaid Smith discovered in the early 1960s that phenacetin caused serious kidney disease, which at its peak was the second most prevalent cause of end-stage renal failure in Australia. A house restorer in Donald, Victoria, once found over 400 empty Beck's bottles buried in a garden. The phrase was so embedded in the culture that a comedy revue titled A Cup of Tea, a Beck's and a Good Lie Down opened at Sydney's Phillip Street Theatre in 1965 and was performed over 250 times. Former PM Kevin Rudd quoted it in 2011 during leadership speculation. Kidney disease rates from analgesic use declined by more than 70% in the decade after the ban, but the phrase itself remains immortal. The Victor lawn mower was invented in August 1952 by Mervyn Victor Richardson in his backyard shed in Concord, Sydney, and the prototype had a peach tin as a fuel tank. His son Gary mowed lawns to earn university money, so Mervyn decided to build a better mower and named it Victor after his middle name Victor, because Australian inventors in the 1950s did not overthink brand strategy. Within 2 years, he'd sold 20,000 mowers. By 1958, the Milperra factory employed 3,000 people building 143,000 mowers per year for export to 28 countries. By 2002, 6.5 million Victor mowers had been sold worldwide. The Saturday morning sound of a Victor two-stroke firing up became the unofficial anthem of Australian suburbia, and generations of sons earned pocket money behind one. Richardson then did something completely unexpected and built an actual light aircraft called the Victor Air Tourer, completing a draftsman's course by correspondence in 6 months when it was meant to take 3 years, and personally designed the thing. They built 168 of them. The same company that made lawnmowers was building planes. At the 2000 Sydney Olympics opening ceremony, an entire routine was dedicated to the Victor, making it the second national symbol after the Hills Hoist that was essentially a household appliance presented to the world without a shred of irony. Flying ducks on the wall were another fixture that nobody could ever explain satisfactorily. 3 ceramic mallards in ascending diagonal formation. Always 3. Always looking like they were flying from one corner of the lounge room to the other, and always arriving absolutely nowhere. They originated at the Beswick factory in Stoke-on-Trent, England in 1938, and were sold in staggering numbers at the affordable end of the home decor market until Beswick ceased production in 1973. Australian pottery companies produced their own versions, including uniquely local variants featuring sulphur-crested cockatoos and galas instead of ducks, because if you're going to have inexplicable birds on your wall, they might as well be native. The ducks appeared on Coronation Street in 1978 on Hilda Ogden's wall, with the middle one deliberately askew, actress Jean Alexander's idea to signify the Ogden's perpetual bad luck. And since Coronation Street aired in Australia, this reinforced what was already a well-established tradition. Original Beswick ducks are now collector's items fetching hundreds of dollars, which is more than they cost new, and which probably says something about nostalgia and the human condition that nobody has quite figured out. Macrame hit Australian homes in the 70s with the force of a craft store tsunami. The two signature products were the plant hanger and the owl wall hanging, and by the mid-70s both were in virtually every room, including the bathroom. The macrame owl was typically made of brown jute or cotton twine with wooden bead eyes, perched on a wooden dowel, staring into the middle distance with the intensity of something that had witnessed too much. Plant hangers hung from every ceiling hook, featuring elaborate knotwork holding a terracotta pot of spider plant or devil's ivy. Jute shed fibers constantly. The hangers dried out and weakened over time, and the combination of water, soil, and gravity meant a failed macrame hanger could dump an entire pot plant on your head without warning. The material was scratchy, The owls were unsettling, and the sheer quantity in some homes suggested an affliction rather than a hobby. Cane furniture was everywhere through the 70s and 80s, and it suited the Australian lifestyle perfectly in theory, lightweight, airy, and cheap thanks to proximity to Southeast Asian manufacturing in Indonesia and the Philippines. The peacock chair, with its enormous fan-shaped back, was the signature piece, and everyone from Marilyn Monroe to Diana Ross had been photographed in one. The problems were quintessentially Australian. Cane furniture's woven construction provided perfect nesting spots for spiders, particularly redbacks and huntsmen, and the open weave was impossible to clean thoroughly. Beyond the arachnid tenants, cane creaked constantly when sat upon. The weave eventually sagged and broke, and getting your skin pinched in the cane was a universal childhood complaint. Bare legs on cane in summer left a distinctive crosshatch pattern on the backs of your thighs that lasted for hours. One Gumtree listing described a vintage peacock chair as having been in the same family for over 60 years, mainly used as a showpiece. Rarely sat on, which may be the most honest furniture description ever written, and also possibly spider avoidance. The beaded door curtain served a genuine function in Australian homes that it never served in England because Australia's fly problem was real. Strings of bamboo or wooden beads hanging from the doorframe between the kitchen and the back door helped deter flies while allowing airflow through unair-conditioned homes in summer. Walking through one was a full contact sport. The strands clattered against your head, tangled in your hair, and occasionally whipped you across the face with the spite of a living thing. Carrying anything through them, a plate of food, a cup of tea, a child, required full-body commitment and the acceptance that you would be assaulted from multiple directions. They gathered dust and dead insects in their strands with impressive efficiency, and they provided zero actual privacy, though the sound of someone coming through announced their presence to the entire house. Not once, in the entire history of beaded curtains, has anyone passed through one undetected. The hallway telephone table existed because Telecom Australia controlled the phone points, and you got one. The phone sat in the hallway, bolted to the wall on a cord that barely stretched a foot, and the telephone table was a combined seat and table unit built specifically for this reality. A small surface for the phone, an attached vinyl seat, and sometimes a drawer for the phone book. Major Australian furniture makers like Parker produced teak versions. The hallway location meant zero privacy. Every family member heard every word of every call. Teenagers performed extraordinary feats of cord stretching, dragging the spiral cable around corners into bathrooms and through doorways in desperate bids for conversational secrecy, and the cord became permanently elongated and hopelessly tangled from years of this treatment. The cream plastic telecom phone, replacing the earlier black rotary models in the early 1980s, became an icon of domestic life. And the sound of that rotary dial clicking back was the sound of calling your mate to see if they could come out. The electric carving knife came out once a year in Australian homes, at Christmas, and spent the remaining 364 days in a drawer or its original box. Available in the era's signature avocado green and harvest gold from Sunbeam, Black & Decker, and Moulinex, it sounded less like a kitchen utensil and more like a small chainsaw. In Australia, where Christmas falls in 35-degree summer heat, the image of Dad wielding a juddering electric knife over a sweating roast while everyone watched nervously was peak suburban theatre. The knife was prone to tearing meat rather than slicing it, and the grease and meat remnants that built up between the twin blades made cleaning a chore nobody undertook properly. The Moulinex 246 model achieved legendary status for indestructibility, with multiple owners reporting they still use the same unit from the late 1970s over 40 years later, with original blades never changed. The Esky traces back to 1884, when Francis Malley started making iceboxes in Sydney. The Esky Autobox launched in 1952, claimed as the world's first portable cooler, a metal-cased unit insulated with cork sheeting, sized to hold exactly 6 26-ounce bottles of beer, and finished in baked green enamel with polished chrome trimmings. By 1960, an estimated 500,000 Australian households owned one, roughly 1 in 6 homes. By 1965, Esky with a lowercase e was being used generically for any cooler in Australian writing, and by 1973, the company itself acknowledged the term had entered the vernacular. The Macquarie Dictionary and the Australian National Dictionary both list it as a generic noun. Government agencies use it. Every portable cooler in Australia is an Esky regardless of brand or manufacturer. It doubled as a seat, a table, makeshift cricket stumps, and in at least one documented case, an improvised lifebuoy after a boating accident. Motorised Eskys fitted with small motors and wheels have been impounded by police. Polystyrene bodyboards are called Esky lids. And at the 2000 Sydney Olympics closing ceremony, each spectator received a promotional polystyrene Esky. Because in Australia, even Olympic souvenirs keep your beer cold. The backyard brick barbecue was the final piece of the quarter-acre block puzzle, and it owes its existence to the Australian Women's Weekly, which in 1953 published detailed instructions for building your own brick barbecue, and ignited a trend that would define suburban backyards for 3 decades. By the 1960s, they were everywhere. Massive structures with a steel hot plate, a wood fire underneath, and sometimes a 6-foot clay sewer pipe repurposed as a chimney because nothing says weekend cooking like sewage infrastructure. Australia's first barbecue cookbook was published in 1958 with the title The Burnt Offering: How Not to Barbecue, a title that captured the entire enterprise with surgical precision. The sausage sizzle, a single grilled snag on a single slice of white bread, never a bun, folded diagonally with fried onions and tomato sauce, became so culturally important that democracy sausage was named Australian Word of the Year in 2016 by the Australian National Dictionary, thanks to the tradition of sausage sizzles at polling places on election day. Paul Hogan's 1984 tourism ad cemented the line "Throw another shrimp on the barbie" globally, despite Australians calling them prawns, not shrimp, and very rarely barbecuing them. The barbie was the altar of the quarter-acre block, tended by Dad with the reverence of a man who couldn't cook anything else but had total jurisdiction over this one sacred domain. What connects all 20 of these items is something bigger than nostalgia. They represent a vanished Australia, the era of the quarter-acre block, the locally manufactured appliance, the one bathroom home where privacy was measured in phone cord length and the toilet paper was guarded by a crocheted doll. The 2000 Sydney Olympics showcased a Hills Hoist and a Victor mower to the entire world as national symbols, which tells you everything about what Australians actually valued. These items weren't ironic. The flying ducks were hung with sincerity. The Fondue set was purchased with genuine optimism. The Shag pile was chosen with conviction. That they seem absurd now says less about the objects and more about how quickly normal shifts. For millions of Australians, looking back means a brown carpeted house with an avocado kitchen, a Hills Hoist out back, a brick Barbie Dad built, and a crocheted doll in the bathroom that nobody was allowed to play with. None of it made sense then either, but it was home. If anything in this video took you back, drop a comment and tell us which one your family had. Tell us which one you can still smell. And if you know someone who grew up with any of these, send this to them because they'll remember every single one. Subscribe to the channel to keep these stories alive.